Good evening to all tuning in from Bushey and across the Jewish Hertfordshire communities. On behalf of Bushey Synagogue and the United Synagogue, it's a pleasure to welcome you to In Conversation, an opportunity for me to share with you a live, in-depth, personal conversation with an individual of particular interest. I would, in that vein, be hard-pressed to introduce someone more appropriate than tonight's guest. The Right Honorable Mr. Oliver Dowden CBE is our Member of Parliament for Hertsmere in Hertfordshire. Beyond looking after the concerns and needs of his constituents, he is the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media, and Sport. And in his role on the Privy Council, he is a close advisor to the Prime Minister and Chancellor of Exchequer. Our MPs grasp and measured approach to the matters of the day have made him a trusted and close advisor to the two previous prime ministers as well. And to this day, he is part of the small team preparing Boris Johnson for his PMQs, having done the same for David Cameron and Theresa May before. Oliver also happens to be a really nice guy, a committed husband and father to his wife and two young children. Tonight, we're going to get to know the man behind the position and field some of the questions that matter to you. The format of the evening will be to present a number of pre-selected questions to our MP, and towards the end, field your live questions, which you can begin submitting through the comment section at this time. So grab a drink, settle into a comfortable seat, and please join me in welcoming, on behalf of the Jewish communities of Bushey and Hertsmere, Mr. Oliver Dowden.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Feldman, for those very kind words of introduction.
Oliver, it's really welcoming and really wonderful to bring you to the program. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule in order to be able to join us. It's so good to see you, even though we have to do it virtually. And can I just say, for this time of evening, you really are looking great. But considering that we know that an image that we see on the screen is just really a snapshot, I thought I would want to begin by asking you how really you and your family are during these extraordinary times. Are you guys well? Are you doing okay?
Thank you. Well, yes, we are. We're very well, thank you. And I'm sorry that I'm dressed slightly less formally than you, Rabbi Feldman. I'd started to ease down a bit this evening, so forgive my informal attire. And you may hear a few family sounds in the background. That's the dog barking. So please ignore that as well. But we're good. My wife's actually a teacher, so she's doing a bit of teaching at the local school, and we're doing a bit of homeschooling with the two children, just like everyone else, trying to juggle all the different demands at the moment.
And has everyone been feeling well? Has everyone been keeping okay in the family? Yes,
well, actually, Blythe, my wife, she had symptoms right at the very beginning, so we self-isolated for 2 weeks, and then lockdown hit. So we've been in this state for quite a while, but we're very fortunate, and like most people in Hertsmere, very fortunate because we've got nice open spaces around us. So I feel bad for people who are stuck in more urban areas. We're very fortunate here to have that space around us. So there's a bit more of a sense of freedom.
Yeah, we are very lucky. If I think back to the last time we actually had a chance to spend some time together in person, I think it would be in February in the Houses of Parliament when the United Synagogue was celebrating its 150th anniversary. It certainly seems like that was a really long time ago, although it really wasn't. Although there were plenty of people of note who were there for that formal reception, besides for two other MPs, according to my recollection, only you were there. And I know that you made an extra special effort in order to be there that evening. And on behalf of myself and your Jewish constituents, I want to thank you for making that effort to be there with us. I get the feeling that the Jewish community is quite important to you. And I thought maybe it'd be a chance for you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, thank you. Yes, it is, and I really wanted to be there. What seems like a lifetime ago now, although it was only back in March, to join in with the celebrations and commemorations of 150 years, because the United Synagogue is a cornerstone of our community here in Hertsmere, and it continues to grow. So not only do we have the well-established community in Bushey, led by you, Rabbi Feldman, but we've also got the very strong community in Radlett, and we've got a very strong community in Boreham Wood. And it was such a pleasure to also be in Shenley for the formal launch of the shul there towards the end of last year. And the Jewish community is at the heart of our life in Hertsmere, whether that's on our borough council or whether that's in the voluntary and charitable endeavours. So the community makes Hertsmere, and I want to be a strong voice for the community in Parliament and locally. And it's been a great pleasure. I think the last time I was at the shul in Bushey was for the Hanukkah lighting, just 2 or 3 days after the general election. So it's ever since I was elected as a member of Parliament, indeed before I became a member of Parliament, I very much enjoyed working closely with the community and building that relationship up over the years. In fact, I think I just recall 2 comments. My wife, when she has got frustrated with me in the past, has told me I spend more time inside a synagogue than I do inside my own family house. And I think the chief rabbi made similar comments when I was at Shenley. He said he'd seen me more than the many congregants. So it's clearly it's a big part of my life, and I very much enjoy it.
Well, we certainly look forward to, please God, welcoming you and everyone really back into our synagogue in the fullness of time. I think that I echo the same sentiments that my wife probably thinks I spend too much time in the synagogue than I do at home as well. I'm not sure if my excuse is any better than your excuse under the circumstances, but there you go. We have had conversations over the last couple of years, not only in celebrating the Jewish influence and presence in Bushey and Hertsmere, but also regarding some security concerns that we've had as well. And I know you've been such a good friend as well, supporting our community and across all Jewish communities in Anglo Jewry as well.
Yes, it's been a pleasure working on a number of causes, from Conservative Friends of Israel, which I'm a long-standing patron, although I've had to temporarily step back now that I'm in the cabinet, through to causes like the Community Security Trust and Camp Simca and other charitable works as well. So very, very, very happy and keen to support all of that.
Well, thank you very much. So Oliver, the Jewish News is one of our Jewish newspapers which are part of the community life. They're producing and publishing right now a 40 under 40 list. And that list is presented every 5 years, in which the UK's Jewish movers and shakers, the rising stars under 40, are listed, 40 of them. Now, myself, I deserve some commiserations. Unfortunately, I didn't make the final 40 at this time, and I probably won't be in the runnings, as I'll be over 40 the next time they come as well. I don't believe that you were on that list either. Quite possibly you weren't eligible because you're not Jewish, but being 41, having your birthday in August, you probably just missed the cutoff anyway. But if you think about it, it's quite extraordinary at your age already for you to have achieved what you have in your life, your position in government, your level of responsibility. You became MP not too much earlier than I moved to Bushey, but you've had so much success, and we're really, really proud that you've had it. What do you consider has led to that success, that rise in prominence, and what does it make you reflect upon in the position that you have?
Well, I'm very surprised, Rabbi, that you're not on the list, and your name certainly comes up a lot in respect to the community. But I don't know. I mean, I think I was very lucky to have. I come from a very ordinary background. My dad works in a wire factory in Watford, and Mum worked in the boots in London Coney. But I've always believed in hard work and providing for yourself and your family, and ultimately I'm very fortunate to be able to work for the community and the country as well. I sort of take each day as it comes, it were. But I believe in working hard and trying to do your best and getting on with things. So I don't think it's any more than that, really. I certainly have a strong sense of trying to do the right thing by the community and the right thing by the country. Look, I've been fortunate enough to have a few lucky breaks. Probably one of them was getting to know David Cameron before he became Prime Minister, and then in fact before I became Leader of the Opposition, and working with him during that period of time. And then I knew this area very well before I became an MP, so I was fortunate when the opportunity arose to be able to stand for my home patch. So that was a bit of a break as well. I certainly think in politics and life, it's you have an opportunity, making sure you try and seize it and see those opportunities when they arise. And I've been fortunate in both of those respects.
Yeah, but
also,
is there anything that you can... Yeah, sorry?
So I should also say, in case my wife is listening to the background, I'm also very, very fortunate to have a very supportive family as well. And it genuinely is, that's a huge factor.
Well, I guess that kind of leads us to the next thing that I was thinking about. One of the things that we have spoken about in the past is the work-life balance and trying to get it right. And this is something that we both share in common. Much of the work that we do really is unsociable hours, time when we could be spending with our family, with our young children, really when they could need us. And trying to get the balance right is never easy. And I was wondering, perhaps in a COVID-19 world, if you've had any reflections or any thoughts on the balance and the priorities that you or we have and how we live our lives.
Well, it's funny actually. The effect of COVID has been quite strange in a way, because we are very much, even as government ministers, being encouraged to work from home as we possibly can. I actually spend a lot more time at home than I have done previously. I do have to occasionally go into London. We actually hold cabinet meetings remotely like this, and I've appeared before parliamentary select committees remotely. But there are a few sensitive issues relating to national security and some when I have to physically go in. But that is fairly rare. So I am physically at home. Although I think if you ask my wife, she says she sees me for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I disappear back up to the office again. But that is an improvement on how it usually is. So that it's nice to spend some time with the family in that sense. I suppose that the flip side of that is that there's less of a sense of work being somewhere else. So working all the time you're out of home, and then coming home and working less and being with the family more. It's there's a sort of those divides blur. But I think all of us, and I think this is one of the things that has, I'm sure you and the people watching this conversation between us, it of course caused us to reflect on family life. And I think actually, because we've been confined at home, it's given us more time to concentrate on more of the sort of the simpler things in a way. So it's been quite good forcing me to, when I'm at home, to actually be at home rather than going off doing other things. So that has been nice for the family. I don't want to overstate it, given the sort of crisis we're in at the moment. Most of my time has been spent responding to that in various, an awful lot of time on these sort of calls and having meetings and clearly dealing with the box and papers and so on. But I think in a crisis like this, it makes you realise what is most important to you. Clearly, for all of us, family is the cornerstone of our lives.
Well, that certainly seems to be the sentiment that a lot of people who are fortunate enough to be with family under these circumstances. Sadly, there's a lot of people across Hertsmere who need to self-isolate, and for them, it's absolutely so awful being cut off from the one thing which is often the life force, and that must be that is truly a difficult fallout from this virus, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I think it's putting a huge toll on people, clearly the self-isolating, particularly elderly community. And I think for lots of people, not being able to see their older family relatives, for example, my wife's family are Canadian, and her sister is also, my sister-in-law is also in the UK, so they feel very remote from them, and clearly very concerned if something happens, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get transatlantic flights at the moment. But it's also good to see the community coming together as well. I don't know whether Councillor Linda Silver is on this call or listening in, but certainly I know that she's had people waving to her from when she's up on her balcony. So she's continuing to participate in community life, albeit remotely. And there's lots of stories of that sort of thing happening, of us coming together. And of course, all of us, I'm sure many people listening to this joined a bit later, as I did, because we're outside with the rest of the community, clapping the NHS, and being very thankful for the huge sacrifices that they're making day in, day out to deal with this crisis.
Well, community volunteering, and that you've alluded to, has been one of the things which has really come to the fore during this time of crisis. And we've been very fortunate in our particular community, but it really across many others, to see people stepping up, those who weren't formally involved in any respect, hearing the call to action, and making the effort to make sure that there isn't anyone who is being missed and who is being isolated. What have been your reflections on the spirit of volunteerism which has come forth during this challenging time as I suppose a silver lining in this awful storm?
Yes, well, I think it goes back to some of the conversation we were just having about realising what's important. Community has clearly come to the fore. Part of my ministerial responsibility actually relates to civil society, and we've seen some fantastic work across the country. So we launched the NHS Volunteer Responders. Over 750,000 people signed up for that. Actually, the challenge has been the other way around, finding opportunities for people to participate in life, such as in volunteering, such has been the level of interest. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. People are coming together, whether it's through Facebook groups, whether it's through voluntarily supporting their own local communities, to try and help the most vulnerable. And that is a good that has come of this crisis.
So when I signed up to become the minister, to become the rabbi of the Bushey community, there are a lot of things that I had on my mind that I would have to be involved with and I would have to put onto my shoulders. I don't think I ever anticipated to have to try to navigate and to help a community weather this type of experience. When you became an MP, when you were elected to be part of the cabinet, I wonder if it crossed your mind as the culture secretary that you would have to deal with tourism and hospitality and digital and sport, my goodness, in such a forum that you've actually had to take on. I mean, it's quite a lot to have to bear under the circumstances, and it's all been thrown at you like it's been thrown at many people really unaware. How are you managing? How are you taking on and dealing with the extra pressure which has come because of this crisis?
Well, my whole time in Parliament has actually been a bit of a roller coaster. So I was elected in 2015. Since then, we've had the EU referendum, Brexit. We've had 2 general elections. We've had 3 prime ministers, and now we have this once in a lifetime crisis. And in terms of how it's affected the culture brief, which I was very keen to take on, and spoke to the Prime Minister about it several times. I was expecting, and what I wanted to do was to be out there promoting the wonderful things about the brief that I have responsibility for, the tech sector that is growing phenomenally in this country. We're the strongest tech country in Europe. Creative industries, we just have to see locally the Elstree Film Studios, BBC Elstree, and soon to be Sky Elstree. Huge, phenomenal demand for the content for platforms. Britain's at the cutting edge of that. So I'm looking forward to promoting those things, reforming our approach to tech and data. And DCOS is sometimes called the Ministry of Fun. I was very cautious to begin with not to do the fun things, expecting I could do those later, but sadly that has not arisen. And actually what we have seen instead is trying to, in this situation, we've had a political crisis, and now, in this crisis, we've had a health crisis, which has in turn given rise to an economic crisis. And a lot of the work of the Chancellor and many others has been about, and the work I've been doing is to try and mitigate the worst impact of that economic crisis. So an awful lot of my time, so forgive me if people can hear typing, that's not from my end either, I should clarify. So a lot of my time has been spent trying to work with those areas of the economy and activity which have been so adversely affected. So, for example, just today I had another conversation with the FA and the Premiership and the English Football League about how we get football back up and running behind closed doors initially. I've been doing an awful lot of work with the tourism sector about how over time we can start bringing the tourism sector back, which employs so many millions, literally millions of people in this country. Or if we look at the challenges facing the theatre and the creative arts, where essentially that whole sector has shut down. And we're seeing that around the world. You see that on Broadway, you see that in the West End. So, you know, I've been meeting just in the past week with people like Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron McIntosh, and people that run the Royal Opera House and all our other great cultural institutions. Think, how can we make those institutions work under the current circumstances? But then on the flip side, we have tech, for which I'm responsible in terms of government policy. We wouldn't be able to have had any semblance of normal life and work without the power of technology. We'd not be doing this now. We've seen a step change. I think most of us, myself included, I was pretty sniffy about having video calls and video meetings like this. They're now the mainstay of my working life. I now operate with two phones and a laptop and two iPads, trying to sort of deal with all different communications coming in from different places. So it's managing our way through that. Those both the threats and opportunities has completely changed the nature of the job that I thought I would be doing.
But somehow you're rising to the occasion. Right before this crisis began, I was due to have a sabbatical, which is every 7 years, a rabbi in the United Synagogue is entitled to 3 months off for continued professional development, winding down, recharging. Beyond being deselected, I don't believe that MPs have the option for a sabbatical. Is there such a concept? Is there such a thing of taking a break, or it doesn't work like that?
Well, it certainly hasn't worked like that for quite a long while. So if you look back over the previous holidays, so Easter, clearly I didn't take a break then because we were dealing with the COVID crisis. Over Christmas, we had a bit of a break, although we did have a big government data breach that I was dealing with. Then the summer, I'd just been appointed to my new role, and Boris Johnson had just become Prime Minister. So I did take a family holiday, but I was on the phone most of the time and working most of the time there. We took a couple of weeks down in Cornwall, and a box was sent every day, and I was on the phone most days with that. So it's stretched. And then the Easter before that was at the height of the Brexit crisis, if you remember that, and we were having all those knife edge votes right up to Easter. But that's the nature of being in public life. You lose an element of control, and of course, everyone now is wondering whether they'll get a summer holiday. I doubt very much we will, given certainly in Parliament, I suspect we may well end up having to sit long hours to catch up with some of the time we have lost because of this crisis. Well,
I'm not sure if you're tempted to become a rabbi, but I don't really seem to be tempted to become an MP under the circumstances. One of the things that that the country's been looking at under what's happened is to see how the government has fared with how they've dealt with this crisis, how they've dealt with bringing the country into lockdown, when they brought it into lockdown, how is it going to emerge from the lockdown. Sadly, unfortunately, the mortality rate within the Jewish community has been extraordinarily high, as it's been across the country compared to other countries in Europe. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how things have been managed regarding quarantining, regarding the direction and the pace that we've gone into, and how we'll be coming out as we approach the next phase now.
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to say is it's actually quite difficult, genuinely, to make comparisons between different countries because of the different demographics that we have, the different stages we're in those cycles. There'll be time to make those comparisons, and clearly there'll be lessons to be learned through that. But I think it is worth cautioning that we're still in the very early stages of this crisis and how it plays out around the world. And you think how we viewed the situation in China a few months ago, or even how we viewed Italy a few weeks ago, you can see how things change very rapidly in terms of perceptions. I think when we entered lockdown, the reason for us entering lockdown, there were two principal tasks that we set. One was to stop this uncontrolled exponential growth of the virus in the community. If you remember, as we went into it, and in the initial phases, we were seeing every 3 days or so the number of cases doubling. We were seeing death rates and hospital admission rates from COVID rising in an exponential fashion. So the first thing we had to do was to try and get control of that, to stop that curve. The second objective was there was a real risk that the NHS could be overwhelmed. The number of people would go up so rapidly, we wouldn't have the capacity in the NHS to deal with it, which is why we built the Nightingale hospitals, why we invested in ventilator and ICU capacity. Now, in respect of those two principal measures, the acceleration of the virus in the community and staying ahead of making sure NHS capacity was ahead of the demand, we have got that. We've got it under control in the community, and whilst death rates clearly remain very high, and each one of those deaths is a tragedy for the families involved, the number of deaths is slowly starting to fall. Certainly the number of people in hospital with COVID is falling quite rapidly. It's quite difficult still to get a sense in the wider community, but certainly samples do suggest that the numbers are falling quite dramatically in the wider community. Of course, there are two big problems still in respect of care homes and in respect of hospitals, where a lot more work is needed, and I can talk through some of the steps that we're taking there. Of course, through this crisis, there are lessons that we have to learn. I think particularly the huge challenges we've had over PPE, the protective equipment, challenges around care homes. That in each country, in the UK included, there are more things that we need to do. So, of course, just like all governments around the world, we are working through that. But I think it is worth also reflecting on the fact that we are out of that phase where the virus has been rising out of control, and we didn't get to the point where the NHS was overwhelmed.
Sorry about that. You mentioned a different perspective. You mentioned about care homes and the testing element, which was pledged to, along with the PPE. Do you feel that that's been progressing quickly enough under the circumstances? Is that something that you see any regrets in any of the stages regarding that area, or any others?
Well, of course, I mean, we want to get PPE to care homes as quickly as we can, and get as much as we can. And just to give a sense of the scale of the challenge we faced with this, at the beginning, before this crisis hit, we were only providing protective equipment to hospitals. That's 200 odd hospitals. Now we're trying to get protective equipment to tens of thousands of institutions. So there's been a massive ramping up in the amount of equipment. There's well over 1 billion pieces of equipment that have been delivered. Now, of course, in the areas where you're not getting that equipment, it's no comfort to you that there's 1 billion pieces of equipment being distributed. So that is why we have to do more work to get those to the right places. So, for example, why we've done things like setting up helplines so that people can report the lack of equipment. We have got to continue to ramp up the testing in care homes. Tens of thousands of tests, both of care home workers and staff, people who are living in care homes, have been undertaken. But yeah, the challenges there are why I've set up this care home action plan to get it under control. And the Prime Minister has been frank about the challenges that we've faced there, and the need to do more, and that everyone across government is straining every sinew to deal with that challenge.
You mentioned the Premier League, and one of my members who happens to support Tottenham Hotspur, is quite unusual for a Jew to do so, and has been really happy that his team hasn't lost the match since March. And I was just wondering, as probably the buck does stop with you in many ways, if you could give us a bit of an insight when we can hope to see football resuming, as it's quite a passion for many across the country, but in our community as well.
Well, look, we all want to get football back as quickly as possible, but the number one test has to be, can we do this in a safe way? So that's the challenge that I have set, and the industry has risen to it. So we've set up this working group for all sports about how we could do it behind closed doors. We've had 3 sessions with the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, understanding how that would work in terms of public health. We're making good progress with that, but we also have to think through other things. So we have to think about what the effect would be in terms of policing, because we don't want to be in a situation where people try to go to grounds where football is taking place. We also need to think about how we can open up access to football so that people can see it safely from their own homes. But I had a very productive meeting today with the Premier League, the EFL English Football League, and with the FA. We're almost there. We're making good progress. I'm hopeful, and don't fully hold me to it, but I'm hopeful that by around mid-June, if we continue on this path, we could get it back up and running by mid-June. But that would be very much subject to public health. And if there's any worries there, then we would have to step back from doing that. But I think there's a real opportunity here, both to get football going again in terms of the sort of sustainability of it as a sport. Football needs to happen in terms of giving people a bit of hope and something to look forward to, enjoy. So if we can possibly do it, we'll do it. And as I said, we've had very productive conversations. So I'm hopeful. I think the way I characterize it, we've gone from there was a sort of red, we've gone to a sort of green amber, but we're still not fully green to go. But I hope maybe in the coming couple of weeks we will be in that to make an announcement.
Well, I look forward to going to a game with you in the fullness of time. One of the things I saw on BBC today was some news regarding Newcastle United and the Saudi Arabia's PIF. And at least it said in the article that you would be brought in possibly to adjudicate regarding the appropriateness or not. Is that true that you might be involved in that discussion? Well,
it's really for the Premier League to carry out this so-called fit and proper person test. So that's really the way that we should deal with this. And I can see on some of the commentary threads about concerns about return of football. I should emphasise that this would be football behind closed doors, so there would not be any sense of the public going in to watch it. And the number one test in all of this is, can we do it in a safe way? And if there's any doubts about that, then we won't proceed with it.
I'm going to just ask one more of my own questions before we open up to those that are being presented on the group. For many people, as we've discussed, football is akin to religion, but for me, religion is akin to religion. And being a person of a cloth, being a person of faith, my beliefs and religion matters a lot to me. And I was just wondering if faith is something which is part of your life, if it's something that you turn to in at different milestones or different life cycle events or times. How does it relate to you and to your family?
Well, I think the truth is probably faith has been the background of my life. So yeah, I went to a Church of England school. It's been part of my life in that way. My wife and I are Christians and brought our children up in the Christian tradition, and it's there in my life. David Cameron, who I used to work for, used to say his faith was a bit like the magic FM signal in the Chilterns. Sometimes it came on strongly, and sometimes it sort of he lost it a bit. And I do have a little bit of sympathy there. So I'd say I'm someone whom it is part of my life, but I certainly see the value, and with my own children as well, and in the wider community, I think bringing children in a faith setting and faith schools and giving children a sense of purpose and love in their lives through faith is a very good and wonderful thing. In terms of my own faith, it's sometimes a bit like the signal of the magic FM.
Aerial, if you ever need, we can get you a good aerial if you ever need one. Just let me know. So opening up to some of the questions that have been coming through, really great to have a chance to speak to myself. But of course, this is also a format for your community, your constituents to have a chance to speak to you as well. Regarding the idea of schools opening at least partially the 1st of June, the questions come through. With your own children, is this something that you think is advisable, something which is sensible, with what we know now about the virus and how it spreads?
Well, look, as with any of these measures we're talking about, the so-called easing of the lockdown, the number one thing is the public health. So the thing we must avoid is this second peak that overwhelms the NHS, because if we allowed that to happen, we would be in the situation where we took an enormous step backwards, and all the sacrifice that so many people have made would in many ways have not been entirely worthless, but it would be really bringing to, it would be a huge risk to all of those sacrifices. In respect of opening schools, again, we're working very closely with government scientific and medical advisors, chief medical officer, and others about how we could do that in a safe way. My children actually have gone to school occasionally because my wife's a teacher. So when my wife teaches at another school and I'm working in London, then they do go to the school as sort of key worker children in that sense. And I would be comfortable sending my children back to school because I would be confident that if school was to have resumed, we would do it in a way that was safe for children. But clearly there are enormous challenges for doing that, not least of which is, whilst we have social distancing, how we can manage social distancing in quite confined school environments. I think it is unlikely that we're going to see a return to school as normal as we saw it before for quite some period of time, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't have some schooling. And I think that would be worth aiming for, both for the children and also for families who may want to get back to work as well. So I think it's something that we should be aiming for. There's many difficult challenges around it, as you've seen with some of the media reporting. But I spoke to the Education Secretary today. I know that he is grappling with this and working through it. But for all of us, and I have to, without giving away confidences of the cabinet, the first thing the Prime Minister always starts with is public health comes first. So we'll only do these things if we can be confident on that score.
Well, I think there's some parallels with opening up the houses of worship and trying to get that at the right balance as well, which all faith communities and government are having to deal with at the moment. One of the other questions that came up had to do with some what was called profiteering of the of possibly overcharging across maybe the high street, or whether it might be in certain industries. Is that something that you've heard about, or something that has crossed your desk at all that you have an opinion on?
Well, it doesn't really fit in my direct ministerial brief. I think that's more one for the business department. But clearly we've got people like the Competition and Markets authorities who will be keeping a close eye out for that.
Okay. One of the other questions which came in, which we discussed a little bit before, having to balance your very heavy central responsibilities in the cabinet, also looking after your constituents here in Hertsmere. And how do you get that balance right? Is it carved up days of the week, or hours of the day, or days and nights? How do you manage it?
Well, pre-COVID, it was the way it tended to work was that my focus from Monday through to Thursday early evening would be in Westminster, because of the hours that Parliament sits. It's very difficult to do much engagement other than dealing with emails and so on during that period of time. And then I would almost always do a Thursday evening engagement after Parliament rises at 5 o'clock on Thursday. So given how close we are to London, it enabled me almost always to do a Thursday evening engagement. I'm now doing Thursday evening engagement, but virtually, but this is perfectly normal for me. Then Friday during the day, doing constituency visits to schools, doctors, hospitals, all businesses and so on, usually a Friday evening engagement. And then at the weekends, it would tend to sort of, I try to get the equivalent to one day out from those 2 days, but it would vary. I mean, lots of MPs tend to work Saturdays, but not Sundays, but clearly with the large Jewish community, that doesn't always work because there's lots of community events going on Sundays, but try to get that balance across the two. But then of course on top of that, as a minister, I will have my box, so government papers, decisions to make, that takes at least half a day of every weekend, plus a couple of hours each evening as well on top of that. In terms of how it's working now, it's a bit of everything all the time, to be honest with you. So I will, I'll have lots of engagements like this, and they'll spread between constituency and at the moment, given where we are with the crisis, the predominance of my time is in relation to dealing with the national situation. But I'm constantly dealing with emails coming in from constituents. I was just looking at some of them just before we came on, but I'm fortunate to be supported by a good team as well, who help with some of the constituency cases if people have specific problems that my office can help with before it then comes to me. I think we've lost you for a moment.
Yeah,
we're back again now. You're giving away some of the tricks of the trade. I can see your script up there.
Just 1 second. I don't know what's happened. I seem to have no. It's not.
We might have two windows open there.
Yeah.
And while you're doing that, I can read some of these questions coming in if you want me to have a go at answering some of them.
Yeah, I think that would be useful if you can.
Okay, so there's a question here about what do I think about the resistance from Premier League footballers to play even behind closed doors. I mean, and I was discussing this with the Premier League and others today. The role of government is not to make football happen; it's to assure ourselves as to whether it could go ahead safely. So if we're confident of that, we can give the green light to the game. It's then up to each club to work with their players to decide whether they want to go ahead and whether to do it safely or not. In relation to theatres suffering so much, yes, I mean, this is a big challenge in relation to theatres restarting. I have had a lot of conversations around this. There's a number of ways through this. So Andrew Lloyd Webber has got his productions going back in Seoul with very tight testing and tracing. I think we're a long way from that, but in the longer run, we might be able to do something there. If we have to open theatres with social distancing, that is going to be highly challenging to make productions work, but it may be, and I think some theatre companies are looking at whether they can get productions up and going again with a much reduced cast. So, for example, they might have one-man shows and so on. But theatre is probably the most challenging area, alongside music concerts and music festivals, where it's going to be very hard to get those back for quite some time. Can we? Are you back in again, Rabbi Feldman?
Yeah, I am back in again. Apologies for my absence temporarily. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, thank you. And I've in your absence, I've tried to deal with Premier League footballers and theatres, which are the two I can see on this thread here.
I'm sure that you've done absolutely admirably in my absence, and appreciate that as well. Those are some of the challenges which obviously with your portfolio that you need to take on. Is there anything which you've had to think about in terms of maybe pushing forward with the agenda of getting broadband to across the country in a more timely fashion, considered that people have to self-isolate for quite some time? Is that something on your agenda at the moment?
Yes, very much so. So, in fact, I was discussing this with the Prime Minister just yesterday. We, as cabinet ministers, we have something called the Prime Ministerial stock take, which is a bit like your meeting with the headmaster in terms of sort of keeping you on your toes. So we have an hour-long session looking at the challenges in my department, and we spend quite a lot of time talking about broadband. So we've got this commitment to get so-called gigabit-enabled broadband rolled out across the country by 2025, but which we are, taking lots of measures to make sure happens. In the short run, what we really need to do is make sure everyone gets proper super fast broadband, because it's super fast broadband which enables us to have conversations like this. And whilst the rollout rates are quite high, and if you don't have it, it's very difficult for you to participate in the modern economy or modern life. So that is the first thing that we need to get right. And it's that, the infrastructure of broadband is really like the railways of the 19th century or the roads of the 20th century. We have to build up that level of infrastructure to enable our modern economy to work. So that's why we're investing so much in it.
We're moving towards the conclusion of our session together, and although it really is great to spend time together, I think both of us, with the work-life balance, getting it right, and I'm sure you also have other meetings to attend to afterwards. I was wondering if maybe you wanted to share some closing thoughts regarding where the government is, just regarding yourself, regarding Hertsmere, regarding Bushey. Really, over to you to just share your own reflections after our time together.
Well, thank you. Well, I suppose perhaps if I could share three reflections. So one is about our national life. Clearly, we are in unprecedented, challenging times, and the road ahead is going to be difficult, and it's going to be long, both in terms of how we recover, both in our country and around the world, from this public health emergency and the economic consequences that flow from it. So I think that is likely to dominate life for many months and probably years to come. But I had the great honor of having responsibility for the VE Day commemorations. And if you think of the challenges that greatest generation lived through, and the challenges that the Jewish community has lived through, the horrors of the Second World War, we know that we can come through these things and be stronger. So I do have faith and hope in that. In terms of the local community, I want to continue to serve a community that I've known and loved and grown up my entire life. I was born in Park Street, grew up in Bricket Wood, known this area all my life. So to continue to try and work with the community to make it a great place to live. And I always say we have, in so many ways, we've got the best of both worlds in this area. We have got lovely countryside around us when the transport's working well, easy access to London, and a strong sense of community. as embodied by the Jewish community. So I really do enjoy working. There's almost like a selfish element to it in terms of making our community that much stronger. And I suppose the third reflection is just the friendships that I've made along the way, and I hope perhaps Rabbi Feldman, I count you as a friend, and so many people listening into this as friends and in the wider community. And I think that one of the huge privilege of public service, and you know this as well as engaged in public service yourself, is that is the richness that you get back from it, those relationships that you build with people, and that sense of purpose. And I look forward to doing this for as many years to come as my wife will put up with.
Well, if you could pass on to her from us our absolute appreciation to have you as our MP and for the role that you are playing in government during these times, and also during more calm and tranquil times. And I presume at some point in time during your working career, you will have some calm and tranquil times. It has to happen eventually. It's just a matter of time before we get there. I wanted to thank you for taking the time this evening to spend with us. It's really reassuring having the friendship, not just personally with that we share, but also that the Jewish community shares with you, and to know that we can turn towards you and that you are thinking about us as well. It's really not just reassuring, but also heartwarming as well. So thank you so much for being part of this broadcast. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the United Synagogue for enabling this broadcast to take place, and to Richard Verber and to his team for ensuring all the background and tech work, and Beth on your side and all of your team for being the counterpart of making that work together. So it just leaves me to conclude by saying, please God, we will meet again in the flesh. And until then, I really hope that you and your family continue to keep well, and that you're blessed in all that you do. And please God, we will be able to share not just the challenging times together, but also the times of fortune, the times of blessing as well going forward, and wishing you a healthy, tranquil, and peaceful weekend ahead as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and to you and your family, and to everyone who's listening, do stay safe, and Shabbat Shalom for tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Nice. Bye.